Hi everyone. So I'm doing my first weekly crystal reading just to see how it goes, see if it resonates for you guys, if it's helpful. I received guidance when I've been focusing on how best to add to the conversation of help and support that we all need right now. You know, the two big things that come back are energy support, psychic protection. But another one that comes through is guidance, because a lot of us, I think, now have this sense that, you know, as we're moving through this and navigating, as best we can through the shutdowns and how they're impacting and changing our world, there's this sense of things not going back to normal, going back to maybe a new normal. Divination, of course, can provide some information, but one thing that I've learned in time through my work is that the future is fluid. It's always changing. There are things that are fixed, but there's also free will. And that actually is really exciting. The idea of free will, because that's empowering. It brings us back to the present and the idea that what we are doing now, what we're thinking now, how we're feeling now, how we're focusing and directing our energy now can have impact on the future and the future that we're creating, hence that term co-creation. So these readings, and as I said, I'm just going to give this week and maybe next week a try. We'll see whether or not it resonates and if it's helpful for all of you. But these readings are more focused on how we can navigate where we are now to help us co-create a possible better future or new normal, or at least give us some guidance and support as we're riding the wave, so to speak. I used to do crystal readings for years in New York City. That was one of the services that I provided, and we currently have a certification course in my academy on professional crystal readings, how to learn how to do them and how to do them really well. But I haven't really been doing much in the way of crystal readings myself. So this is kind of a nice return. One of the things that I really love about doing crystal readings is, yes, there are certain things we can interpret in terms of the crystal's properties, color, shape, etc. These are all things that I teach, but the additional thing that I teach is being able to connect with the crystal energy and consciousness directly and channel information. And that's what I really like about this work, because it's very clean. It's very clean. There's not, a whole lot of room for interpretation, which of course is where, room for inaccuracy or projection or other things might come in. So it's something that I found my way into doing, just like I did with my crystal healing work years ago. And it's nice. It's nice to come back. So I'm going to start the reading, and I already tuned in and picked the three crystals that I was pulled to, that I was guided to for this week. And my intention was, I just really sort of focused on, what's the highest possible guidance that we can receive at this time to support us, given where the energies are and where they're flowing this week. So the first crystal that came through was rose quartz. This was the first one that I was drawn to. The second one was blue kyanite. And the third one, because I generally do 3 or 5 crystal readings, the third was chalcedony and a chalcedony egg. So I'm going to start with the rose quartz because that's what came to me first. Rose quartz, of course, is energies of love, of nurturing, of companionship, of compassion. It's also a very, very deep healer in terms of our sense of self-worth. And our sense of self-worth, of course, underlies so much of our lives, our choices that we make, what we seek to co-create. So that's an interesting choice that came through. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just connect with its energy. And so, the message that's coming through, I've got tingles on my crown. The message that's coming through from the rose quartz is that we need deep self-nurturing and self-soothing this week. Because what it's showing me is, in part, this is an antidote to fear. It's an antidote to insecurity, even anxiety to some extent. When we are in a more whole and loving place within, we can be in that energy with whatever we're facing, and it's more soothing, it's more supportive. But there's actually something more that's coming through in terms of this, which is as things are being extended, the shutdowns are being extended, there's growing fear, there's growing anxiety, but also with people being stuck inside so much, there's that cabin fever thing that starts to take over. People start to get angsty or antsy, I guess is the word that's coming through, but also anger. There's rising frequencies of anger and frustration for people, which is completely understandable. And that needs to be honored, that needs to be expressed, but at the same time, we need to find loving ways to channel that, to acknowledge that, and as the information came through, to self-soothe. So for anyone who is, feeling that or feeling the rising tide of that this week, you're definitely encouraged to work with rose quartz. And also for anyone who's feeling that energy coming from other people, that loving energy can create a buffer zone when you're centered in that. When you're centered in that rose quartz energy and that loving energy, it can create a buffer zone, A, for that energy, but B, it also creates an internal buffer zone in terms of being able to respond with compassion. And of course, compassion is an antidote to judgment. Compassion is an antidote to shaming or anything else, any space that, we may understandably go into in response to feeling someone else's anger. So that's the first crystal in the reading. That's the first bit of guidance is to really work on establishing that love-centered, that heart-centered place, which of course can be challenging, but this crystal energy can support us. And so be aware that that may come through this week. It may come up in your household. You may see more of that online, because when people get scared, when they feel threatened, their livelihoods, their lifestyles, whatever it might be, anger it's a natural response. It's an understandable response. So being able to stay aligned and centered in that energy is going to be really valuable. So the next crystal that I picked, thank you, rose quartz. The next crystal that I didn't pick, but that came through, was blue kyanite. And blue kyanite's a very interesting crystal because we've got the blue, which resonates with the third eye chakra and also the throat chakra. Our third eye chakra, yes, is our psychic abilities. It's our creative center. It's a spiritual center for sure, but it's also cognitive in terms of the mind, in terms of reason, in terms of logic. And certainly for those who have, challenges with communicating or articulating thoughts, and speaking up in a way that they feel is effective and that can also be understood, because that's part of communication as well, not just expressing, ourselves, but expressing ourselves in a way that we can be understood by others, and also listening. So tuning into the energy and frequency of blue kyanite, and it's interesting because right away what's coming through really powerfully is listening. Listening to ourselves and our truth, listening to others. And again, this seems actually to be related quite powerfully to the emotional range, because of course we're just on this intense emotional roller coaster, and the questions come through in terms of how do we respond to this in a way that is in our highest, and also how do we stay open to listening what's coming through in terms of our psychic guidance, our spiritual guidance, our creative selves and thought centers, and also our cognitive, our ability to reason, our ability to think things through. This is the structure, this is the sacred masculine. It's also coming through very powerfully, because as we start to look at, when we move forward, when we're able to return to some kind of new normal, how do we function? How do we operate? What might we have to do differently? What might we have to do first? Where do we see ourselves going? We need that connection to the vision, both the creative and the intuitive, but then we also need to be able to reason it out. And so it's being able to really listen to that and listen to ourselves and be able to give that shape and give that form. Interestingly enough, too, blue kyanite, another thing that it's offering in terms of guidance for this week is for people who are, there's a type of, I almost call it like a telepathic, empathic ability. For those of you, put your hands up, I'm one of them too, where we're not just sensitive to energy and especially emotional energy, but also mental energy in terms of thought. We may not be like directly reading someone's mind per se, but we're sensitive to and aware of the chatter, the noise, the radio waves, the telecommunications, what people are thinking in terms of the emotional resonance to their thoughts and to where they are in their head. And that can be so hard to filter out. And that is something that blue kyanite does expertly. So again, because the frequency of emotion just keeps rising, and it's not just in terms of, a concern or confusion in terms of where we are and how we get through where we are, but also to where we're going and what we're facing when we come out. And there is eventually there is, that shift is coming. It's not, I don't see it coming soon. I don't see it, in the next month, but as I said, things can change. But certainly that shift is coming, and it's like, what do we come back to? How do we rebuild? These stresses and pressures will start happening. And so whether it's happening in your own head or if you're sensing it from the world around you, that can create static, that can create blockage for your own creative and psychic centers, which then affects how you're thinking. So if any of that's coming through for you guys this week, or comes up this week, working with that blue kyanite, wearing that blue kyanite, it's actually showing me to sleep with it. Place it under your pillow or fall asleep with it on your third eye at night, and it'll fall off and go wherever it goes, and that's fine. Wow, this stone is really hot. But that's, something else that's coming down the pipeline, and a way that we can support ourselves so that we can filter out what's coming from the outside, and we can get really in tune to what's coming on the inside. And then last but certainly not least is the chrysocolla egg. And of course, going right into the shape of the egg, we're talking rebirth here, new starts, the birth, death, rebirth cycle. Of course, that is coming up. And so again, this is something that's really, powerfully coming in terms of the wavelengths, in terms of where we're starting to think. For those of you who were imagining a fresh start, this may be your chance. For those of you who are looking to rebuild once you come out of shutdown, chrysocolla is a stone of compassion and ease and flow, but it's also really deeply intuitive. And again, really, that theme of being tapped into the emotional self. So allowing yourself to come into that emotional and intuitive place in a way that is compassionate, in a way that is centered in grace, so that you can start to tune into, where you want to restart, rebuild, where you need rebirth, where you might be looking for a fresh start, and what that might be looking like, and tuning your energy to that and coming into alignment with that. So that's this week's crystal reading. I look forward to your comments to see if this is helpful, and if it is, I'll be back doing this again next week.